6 men walked into a warehouse near Heathrow expecting to find pesetas, Spanish holiday money. Maybe £1 million if they were lucky. What they found instead was 3 tons of gold, sitting on the floor, waiting for a flight it would never catch. By the time they walked back out, they were holding the biggest robbery in British history. And here's the part that never makes it into the headlines. They didn't plan for the gold. Nobody did. The crime of the century started as a mistake, and the men who pulled it off spent the rest of their lives trying to survive their own luck. This is the file on Brinksmat. But the gold isn't actually what interests me here. What interests me is the machine underneath it. This wasn't a smash and grab. It was a system, weeks of inside information. A guard turned, a plan careful enough to walk 6 armed men into a vault holding a small nation's bullion and back out again in under half an hour. On paper, close to perfect, and it fell apart in 10 days. Not from a shootout, not from a fingerprint on a door handle, from a single thread nobody in that crew thought to hide, because nobody imagined anyone would think to pull it. So keep one question in your head, because the whole story turns on it. How does a plan built this carefully come apart from one detail nobody protected? The gold, the furnaces, the dead detective, the money that vanished into the walls of London. All of it hangs off that one question. And the answer isn't clever police work. It's smaller than that, and stranger. By 1983, London had a long tradition of a certain kind of robbery. Careful, patient, almost tradesman-like. Brinksmat was built on inside information and on the assumption that a warehouse full of routine cargo would stay routine. Nobody in that crew was thinking about gold. The plan was cash, and the gap between what they planned to steal and what they carried out the door is where everything later went wrong. 6:40 in the morning, the 26th of November, 1983. Heathrow International Trading Estate, a stretch of low warehouses just outside the airport fence. The kind of place you drive past 1,000 times and never look at twice. Unit 7 belonged to a company called Brinksmat, a joint venture between the American security firm Brinks and a British transport outfit called MAT. On paper, it moved cash, payrolls, foreign currency, the unglamorous plumbing of commerce. That morning, 6 men in balaclavas were waiting for the night shift to open the doors. They didn't break in, they were let in. A security guard named Anthony Black opened the way. He wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was an ordinary employee, the kind of face that clocks in and out of a building so often nobody thinks to question him. And that was exactly the value he offered the crew. He'd taken impressions of the main door key. He'd given them the layout, the shift patterns, the blind spots in the building's routine. When the guards clocked in that morning, the robbers were already inside, and inside took 30 seconds to become something else entirely. They poured petrol over 2 of the staff and told them plainly, "Give us the combination or we light the match." Nobody in that room was bluffing about the petrol, and nobody needed telling twice. The combination came fast. The vault opened. What the robbers expected was cash. Roughly £1 million in Spanish pesetas, an easy target for a crew that had done its homework. What they got was 75 boxes stacked outside the main vault, packed with 6,800 bars of gold bullion. 3 tons of it, 96,000 troy ounces. It belonged to Johnson Matthey bankers, and it was sitting there overnight for one reason only. It was scheduled to fly to Hong Kong the next morning. That detail matters more than it sounds. Warehouses like Unit 7 existed precisely because banks needed a secure staging point between the vault and the runway. Nobody expected a payroll warehouse on an industrial estate to be holding a small nation's gold reserve on any given Tuesday night. That was the entire point, and that same boring reliability is what made it invisible, right up until 6 masked men were standing inside it. Along with the gold, they took platinum, 1,000 carats of diamonds, and $250,000 in traveler's checks. Total value, £26 million. In today's money, close to 290 million. 3 tons isn't a figure of speech. It's the weight of a small truck, and it took more than one trip to the vehicles outside, working fast against a clock that had started the moment the first guard was tied up. And this is the exact moment the plan quietly broke, though none of them knew it yet. Here's the problem nobody in that warehouse had planned to have. You can steal 3 tons of gold in 20 minutes. Try selling it. Gold bars carry serial numbers, refiner's marks. The moment you move bullion through a bank or a dealer, you're handing over a paper trail with your name already half written on it. 1 million in pesetas they could have spent quietly for years. But 3 tons of registered bullion, belonging to one of the most respected names in the gold trade, doesn't spend. It has to be hidden, melted, disguised, and fed back into the world, 1 careful ounce at a time. The robbery took 20 minutes. Undoing that problem would take the rest of their lives. And it's what got most of them caught. So the machine started turning, and the first crack in it showed up 2 days later, in a garden shed near Bath. A couple saw something strange, a white-hot crucible, glowing through the window of a garden hut on a neighbor's property. Melting metal, in the middle of the night, in a quiet corner of Somerset. They thought of the news from Heathrow and called the police. An officer came out, was shown the hut, and told them it was just beyond his jurisdiction. He'd pass it along to the right division. Nobody ever followed up. The couple was never asked for a statement. They were never called to give evidence, and no explanation was ever given for why the tip went nowhere. Sit with that, because it's the mirror image of everything the robbers got wrong. The gang was undone by one overlooked detail. So was the investigation. 2 days after the biggest bullion theft in the country's history, the trail to the smelting operation was glowing in a shed, reported, on the record, in a police officer's hands, and it was let go over a line on a map. That shed belonged to a jeweler and bullion dealer named John Palmer. By the time police finally raided it, it wasn't 2 days later. It was 14 months. Palmer was on holiday in Tenerife. His partners, Garth Chappell and Terence Patch, were arrested instead. Around the same time, roughly £13 million moved suddenly through Barclays branches in the Bristol area, large enough it reportedly reached the Bank of England. Less than a month after the robbery, Austrian police in Vienna arrested 5 men carrying gold bars stamped with the exact refiner's marks and serial numbers stolen from Johnson Matthey. For a moment, it looked like the case had cracked open. Then the bars turned out to be counterfeit. Gold-plated tungsten, made so the men could claim a share of the reward money without ever having touched the real thing. Nobody ever explained how they'd gotten serial numbers that had never been published. One more small mystery, never solved. But the man running point on turning gold into cash wasn't Palmer. It was a name that would define the second act of this story, Kenneth Noye. Noye was brought in by Brian Perry, an associate of the robbers who was holding part of the money for one of the men who'd gone into the warehouse, Mickey McAvoy. Noye knew how to melt bullion, recast it, and mix in copper coins to disguise its origin before it went back into legitimate circulation. He was good at it. Good enough that police put him under surveillance at his own home in Kent. In January 1985, an undercover detective named John Fordham was watching Noye's property, dressed in camouflage, doing the kind of quiet work surveillance requires. Noye came across him in the grounds. He stabbed Fordham 10 times. The detective died. At trial, Noye claimed self-defense, said he'd been attacked by an intruder he didn't recognize as police. The jury acquitted him of murder. A second man on the property that night, Brian Reeder, faced the same charge and was also acquitted. Read that back. A police officer, watching a known criminal suspected of laundering the largest gold theft in British history, was killed on the job, and the man who killed him walked out of court a free man on the murder charge. The gold case against Noye came a year later. In 1986, he was convicted of conspiracy to handle the stolen bullion, fined £500,000, ordered to pay $200,000 in costs, and sentenced to 14 years. He served 7. By then, the money had scattered in a dozen directions. A solicitor named Michael Relton was convicted of smuggling £7.5 million through Switzerland and Liechtenstein and reinvesting it into London's Docklands property boom. New towers on old Dockland ground, built in part on melted gold. He got 12 years. McAvoy's wife, Kathleen, was convicted of conspiring to handle the stolen gold, though her sentence was suspended. A property developer named Gordon Perry ran his own offshore network out of Jersey, a shell company called Febrion, controlled through nominee directors and bearer shares that could change hands without ever putting a name on paper. Decades later, the same company would resurface in the Panama Papers, in files belonging to the law firm Mossack Fonseca, still tangled up in the same £26 million. Perry funneled the proceeds into land and property. He was convicted alongside 3 others and sentenced to 10 years. His accomplices, Brian Perry, Patrick Clark, and Gene Savage, took 9, 6, and 5 years respectively. John Palmer, the man who owned the shed with the furnace, stood trial in 1987 and told the court he had no idea the gold passing through his hands had anything to do with Heathrow. The jury believed him, or at least couldn't disprove him. He walked. History would later nickname him Goldfinger and give him one of the strangest endings in this entire case, but that comes later. So here's where the case should have ended. A well-executed robbery, undone by the ordinary impossibility of turning 3 tons of registered gold into spendable cash. And that machine, the melting, the smuggling, the offshore shells, took years to unravel. But it isn't what cracked the case open. What took police only 10 days to reach the men who walked into that vault was something smaller, more human, and much harder to plan around. Anthony Black, the guard who'd let them in, had a sister. She was living with a man named Brian Robinson, and Robinson wasn't a stranger to the police. He was already sitting in flying squad intelligence files, a known face in London's armed robbery scene. That's the whole thing. That's the thread. The moment detectives connected Black to his sister's partner, the entire operation had a name attached to it, and that name already had a file. Black, who'd been late to work on the morning of the robbery, was pulled in, questioned, and folded. He confessed in December 1983. 10 days after the raid, Robinson and Mickey McAvoy were under arrest. Now go back to the question I asked you to hold. How does a plan built this carefully come apart from one detail nobody protected? There it is. 6 men planned a warehouse job for weeks. They worked out the entry, the timing, the guards' cooperation, the getaway. They thought about the vault and the alarms. Nobody thought about a sister. Nobody planned for a detective to draw a straight line from a family address to a name already sitting in a filing cabinet. The flaw wasn't in the vault. It wasn't in the getaway. It was in a relationship nobody thought to hide, because nobody imagined they'd need to. The perfect plan didn't have a technical weakness. It had a human one, and that's the only kind that mattered. Robinson and McAvoy were tried at the Old Bailey in December 1984 and sentenced to 25 years each for armed robbery. They served until 2000. Black, who confessed and turned informer, was convicted separately and served 6 years. He was acquitted of the robbery itself in a later civil case, but a high court judge still found him liable, ordering him to repay the full $26 million plus damages on the finding that he'd helped plan it from the inside. And then there's the part that keeps going long after the courtroom doors closed. Call it the curse, if you want the tabloid version. What actually happened is simpler and darker. Nearly everyone who touched the laundering chain ended up dead, in circumstances never fully explained. Charlie Wilson, an old Great Train robbery figure brought in to help move some of the proceeds, was shot dead in Spain in 1990 after losing £3 million of investors' money. Nick Whiting, questioned in the same investigation, was found shot and stabbed that same year. Donald Urquhart, another launderer, was killed on a London street in 1993. Keith Headley was shot on his yacht in the Mediterranean in 1996. Solly Nahome, a jeweler linked to the case, was shot outside his own home in 1998, the same year his associate, Gilbert Winter, simply vanished. Brian Perry, the man who first brought in Kenneth Noye, was shot dead in 2001, months after his release from prison. George Francis was killed outside his courier business in 2003. And in 2015, John Palmer, Goldfinger himself, the man a jury once believed knew nothing, was shot dead at his home in Essex. 8 men, 3 decades, all of them connected, however loosely, to the same £26 million. None of the killings were ever conclusively tied back to the robbery in court, and some of the connections were never more than suspicion, traded quietly among detectives and journalists. A pattern is not a verdict, but in London's underworld, the assumption was that it was real, because it was too consistent to feel like coincidence. A man makes one call about a shipment of gold. 20 years later, he's found in his car, or on his boat, or on the pavement outside his own front door. None of this is glamour, it's arithmetic. Every hand, £26 million passes through, takes a cut, keeps a secret, and becomes one more person who knows too much. In a business built on silence, that's its own kind of debt, and debts like that get collected eventually. A £2 million reward sat unclaimed for years, not because nobody knew where the gold was, because talking was worth less than staying alive. By 2004, 25 of the original 26 million had technically been recovered through court judgments, asset seizures, insurance clawbacks. Lloyd's of London had already paid out the full amount to Johnson Matthey years earlier. But recovered on paper isn't the same as recovered in fact. Most of the actual gold, the physical bars melted down in furnaces, like the one in that bath shed, was never seen again in its original form. Investigators later estimated that roughly half of it made its way back into the legitimate gold market. Remelted, recast, sold as ordinary bullion with no history attached. The other half is generally believed to have simply been buried, somewhere, by someone who never talked. And this is the part that circulated for years afterward, impossible to verify and impossible to dismiss. That a meaningful share of the gold jewelry sold in Britain after 1983 contains at least a trace of Brinks-Mat gold, melted down and folded back into the supply chain so thoroughly it can't be traced now. Nobody can prove that. Nobody can disprove it either. If you own gold bought in Britain in the last 40 years, there is no test you can run to be certain it isn't a few grams of a warehouse floor at Heathrow. So walk through it one more time. A robbery planned around cash turned into the theft of the century by accident. And that accident, the gold nobody planned for, is exactly what they couldn't sell, couldn't move, and couldn't stop being connected to. It's what pulled almost every one of them under. They were caught in 10 days, not because of a mistake in the plan, but because of a family tie nobody thought needed hiding. The gold took years to launder, killed a police officer along the way, and helped fund luxury development still standing in London today. And half of 3 tons of it simply disappeared into the ordinary flow of the world, indistinguishable now from gold that was never stolen at all. That's the part of this file that never really closes. Not the arrests, not the sentences, the gold itself, sitting somewhere or worn somewhere, permanently unaccounted for. Legally, the file is shut, every sentence served, every civil judgment entered. On paper, Brinks-Matt is a solved case with a settled ledger. But a solved case and a finished story aren't the same thing. And this one never quite finished, because the one thing that mattered most, the actual gold, walked out somewhere in the mid-90s and never walked back in. I want to be clear about one thing before I close this file. None of this is worth admiring for its own sake. 6 men threatening to burn 2 working people alive for a vault combination isn't clever. It's cruelty with a plan attached. What's worth studying isn't the violence. It's the machine that came after it, and the single overlooked thread that took the whole thing apart in 10 days. The robbers built something close to perfect and lost it to a sister's address. The police let the smelting shed slip through their fingers over a line on a map. 2 overlooked details on opposite sides of the law, and the gold walked out through the gap between them. There's another vault file sitting on my desk right now. Different country, different decade, same question running underneath it. What happens when a plan built to be perfect meets the one detail nobody thought to protect? Because that's the uncomfortable truth sitting at the center of the crime of the century. Brinks-Matt wasn't beaten by a smarter investigator or a better security system. It was beaten by an address book. And somewhere out there, gold that once sat on a warehouse floor at Heathrow is circulating quietly through ordinary hands, in ordinary jewelry, unnoticed. The hidden engine is always running. Most people just never look under the hood. I'll be here when you're ready to open the next file. Until then, keep looking at the parts of the story everyone else skips past. That's usually where the real answer is hiding.